Hi, I'm Avery. I found out about my sister's wedding through Instagram. Not a phone call, not a text, not even a forwarded invite by accident. Just a picture on her story, her hand with a ring, a glass of champagne, and the caption, "Can't wait to say yes in Santorini." Hashtag bride mode activated. My thumb hovered over the screen longer than it should have. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't react with an emoji. I just watched the story disappear, like it hadn't bruised me in a place I'd carefully taught myself to ignore. I stared at my phone as if it owed me an explanation. It didn't. And neither did she. My sister, Alara, had always been the crown jewel of the family. Blonde, loud, charming in a way that made strangers lean in closer and forget who else was in the room. I was not like her. My mother used to say I was the quieter bloom, as if I were something you'd plant in the corner of a garden, not for show, just for scent. I never minded. Until she made it sound like I didn't belong in full light. I didn't ask her about the wedding. I didn't mention the post. I pretended I hadn't seen it, even when our cousin Kiera messaged me the next day, asking what I was going to wear. I wrote back with a smiley face and a lie. Haven't picked a dress yet. I didn't tell her I hadn't received an invitation. I didn't tell anyone. 2 weeks later, a parcel arrived at our apartment. I live in a shared flat, just 2 bedrooms, thin walls, and a tiny balcony where the paint's peeling. The box was slim, flat, marked with Alara's initials on a gold sticker. I didn't open it at first. I left it on the kitchen counter like it might explain itself if I gave it time. When I finally peeled the tape away, inside was a card, one of those high-end printed ones with deckled edges and heavy cream stock. It wasn't an invitation. It was a note.
No greeting.
Just 3 lines, written in her neat, curly script. I know you like to keep things simple. This event isn't really your scene. Maybe just sit this one out, yeah? No hard feelings. Hugs and kisses. No hard feelings. I held that card like it might snap in half from the heat in my fingers.
I didn't cry.
Not because it didn't hurt, but because the hurt had traveled deeper. Past the place tears lived. I placed the card back in the box and slid it under the couch, between the old yoga mat I never used and a stack of magazines I didn't read anymore. Then I made myself a cup of tea I wouldn't finish. I didn't tell my roommate, Cammie. She would have gone into full righteous anger mode, demanded I show up anyway, made some elaborate plan about crashing the ceremony. Cammie believed in things like closure, justice, your moment. I believed in keeping peace, staying out of photos I wasn't invited to be in. Until I didn't. The shift happened quietly. Not in one dramatic moment. Not because I watched a movie about self-worth or read a quote on Pinterest that told me to shine. It happened on a Tuesday during lunch break while scrolling through my camera roll. I came across an old photo. It was me and Alara at age 13 and 15, respectively. I was wearing a maroon sweater with one cuff stretched out. She had on a glitter top, half-tucked, a smirk on her face like she knew secrets I never would. But in that picture, I was mid-laugh. The kind of laugh that starts in your belly and reaches your eyes. And something about it caught me off guard. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped laughing like that. I tapped the screen, zoomed in on my own face. My eyebrows were still uneven. My skin had always been on the plain side, my eyes not particularly wide or interesting. But there was something there. Not beauty, not charm, just light. Light I hadn't seen in a while. That weekend, I went to a consignment boutique near the train station. One of those places that sells pre-loved luxury. The kind with shoes arranged like artifacts behind glass. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I didn't know what I was doing there, just that I needed to be somewhere that didn't feel like hiding. And that's when I saw it. A black velvet jumpsuit with structured shoulders and a neckline that didn't apologize. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trendy. But it was bold.
Solid.
Something that didn't ask for permission to be worn. I tried it on in the corner stall with a flickering overhead light. When I stepped out, even the sales associate paused. She looked me up and down and gave a small nod.
I didn't ask the price.
I just bought it, bagged it, zipped it up, and carried it home like it was a secret I hadn't decided whether to keep. Alera's wedding was in Santorini. But before the flight, there was the engagement brunch. I hadn't been invited to that either. But this time I showed up. I arrived 15 minutes late, on purpose. I walked into the hotel restaurant where the brunch was hosted, a rooftop space dripping in white orchids and crystal flutes of Prosecco. Heads turned before the door, even fully opened. I walked in alone.
No announcement, no excuse.
Just me in that black jumpsuit and a red lip I rarely wore. Alera was at the center of the room, surrounded by a group of girls who all looked vaguely filtered in real life. Soft curls, nude heels, soft pinks, laughter that sounded like it knew the cameras were rolling. When she saw me, her smile froze. Just for a second. Then she laughed too brightly and said something to the woman next to her. I couldn't hear it, but I didn't need to. The way her hand fluttered in my direction, dismissive, casual, said everything. I walked past the guest book table, past the gold-lettered banner with their wedding hashtag, past the uncomfortable stares of distant cousins who didn't know if I was supposed to be there. I made it to the mimosa bar, poured a glass, and stood by the railing facing the sea. I didn't talk much. I didn't need to. I was seen. And for once, not as an accessory to someone else's glow. Alera never spoke to me that day. Not directly. Her fiancé, Nathan, did. Briefly. He said I looked striking. Like I was a building or a thunderstorm. Then he walked away quickly, like maybe he'd said too much. The brunch ended without incident. I left when the music got too loud and the stories got too curated. That night, I booked a one-way ticket to Santorini. First class. I used the money I had been saving for a secondhand car. And then I called a car service. Not a cab. A limo. Because sometimes the only way to be heard is to arrive in a way they can't ignore. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was something else. A refusal. A refusal to let myself be written out quietly. And that was only the beginning. The airport was quiet when I arrived, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like fog. I didn't carry much, just a single suitcase and the velvet garment bag that held the black jumpsuit. My name wasn't on the guest list at the wedding resort in Santorini, but I wasn't worried. People don't look too closely at a woman stepping out of a limousine, especially when she tips well and walks with certainty. When I landed, I let the driver take care of my luggage while I slipped on sunglasses big enough to hide behind. The sun was already burning against the whitewashed walls and cobalt domes. It looked exactly like Alera's Instagram. Overfiltered, too perfect, like a postcard with no space to write the truth. The limo driver, a quiet man named Vasilis, didn't ask questions. He just nodded, held doors, and made things feel important. The wedding venue sat at the edge of a cliff, all glass and marble and curated greenery. From the main courtyard, you could see the Aegean stretching out endlessly, the kind of view meant to humble you. I stood there for a moment, taking it in, wondering how much of Alera's life was built for admiration and how little of it ever made room for honesty. Inside, the staff swarmed politely around last-minute prep. I wasn't on the official check-in list, but I wasn't turned away either. I gave a fake name, something forgettable, and they handed me a keycard with a suite number. My room was smaller than the others, tucked at the edge of the property, but it had a view and a minibar and a balcony that caught the breeze just right. I unpacked slowly, the way you do when you know you're not supposed to be somewhere, but you're staying anyway. That evening was the welcome dinner, another event I hadn't been invited to. Still, I dressed. Not in the jumpsuit. This time, I wore a satin green dress I'd found in a thrift store back home. It fit better than it had any right to, clinging in places I didn't usually show and shining under the hallway light. I kept my hair pinned up. No lipstick this time. Just a steady face and eyes that didn't blink too much. I arrived just as the sun began to drop below the sea. The tables were set in long rows beneath strings of golden lights. Guests clinked glasses and tossed back laughter like it cost nothing. Alera sat at the head table, her profile perfect, her smile locked in place. Nathan sat beside her, a little too stiff in his tuxedo jacket. When I entered, a few heads turned. Some people looked confused, others curious. But no one stopped me. I took a seat near the back, close enough to see, but far enough not to be seen. Or so I thought. Halfway through the dinner, during some overlong toast about how real love always finds its way, a woman with sleek hair and an expensive watch sat beside me. I recognized her as Alara's friend from university. The one with the podcast about powerful women making powerful choices. She looked me over like I was a question she hadn't prepped for. Then she leaned in and said, too softly to be casual, "You weren't on the list." I turned my head slowly, letting silence stretch between us like elastic. Then I smiled, a small one, and said, "Some things don't need to be listed to be remembered." She blinked once. Then she laughed, sharp and brief, and turned back to her salad. The rest of the night passed in a blur of speeches, clapping, wine glasses catching candlelight. Alara never looked my way, but I saw her eyes shift once when Nathan leaned over to speak to someone on her blind side. She caught him glancing in my direction, and for a flash, her smile faltered. I didn't stay long after dessert. I slipped away while they were lighting sparklers for pictures, taking advantage of the chaos. Back in my room, I unpinned my hair, wiped off the mascara, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at my hands. I thought about what I'd done, what I was doing. There was no plan, no big reveal, just a refusal. A refusal to stay invisible in a story I had been part of all along. The morning of the wedding came too early. I woke before the alarm, heart jittering like it had somewhere to be. I showered, dressed slowly, braided my hair into a crown, and applied the red lipstick again. The black jumpsuit waited patiently on its hanger, like it already knew its purpose. I slipped it on and stood before the mirror, unfamiliar in my own reflection. Not in a bad way, just new. Outside, guests began to gather in the courtyard. White umbrellas were placed at each seat. A string quartet warmed up under a linen canopy. Alara's voice carried from the bridal suite, laughing, then giving instructions. Her tone was sharp beneath the sweetness. I waited until most of the guests had made their way toward the ceremony area before leaving my room. I didn't go straight to the garden. I went to the banquet hall, empty for now, with staff finishing the setup for the reception. There was a projector screen rolled up near the stage. I walked over to the tech table. A laptop was open, music cued, slideshow ready. I hesitated, then pulled a flash drive from my purse. It was small, silver, labeled nothing. I replaced the file with one of my own. A video I had edited myself, an old home recording, grainy, forgotten, but sharp where it counted. Then I left. At the ceremony site, I found a seat near the edge. No one noticed, or pretended not to. The aisle was lined with rose petals, soft pinks and whites, like a dream curated in pastels. When the music began, everyone stood. Alara appeared, framed in sunlight, her veil floating like a second skin. She looked radiant, of course. She always did. But I didn't feel small this time. I didn't feel erased. I just watched, steady and whole. The ceremony moved forward with precision. Vows were exchanged, rings placed. Applause swelled like a wave. And then it was done. The reception began an hour later. Lights dimmed. Music picked up. Champagne poured like water. I stood near the back wall, unnoticed again, but this time not invisible, just watching. Waiting. A hush fell as the MC announced the beginning of the slideshow. Guests turned toward the screen. The first few slides were as expected. Alara as a baby. Alara in ballet. Alara at graduation. Then came a clip from a school talent show. But it wasn't Alara in the center. It was me, 7 years old, nervous, standing beside a piano, almost bigger than I was. My fingers found the keys with the unsure grace of someone who had never been told she could shine. Alara had filmed it. I remembered now. She'd rolled her eyes the whole time, then shoved the camera at our dad and walked off. But the footage remained. The clip played, then cut to images of me over the years. Playing piano. Winning a local contest. Holding a certificate. Forgotten moments stitched together like proof that I had existed. That I had mattered. At the end, The screen faded to black. A single sentence appeared in white text. She never needed your spotlight. She built her own. There was no applause. Just silence. Thick and confused. Alara stood near the cake, frozen. Her mouth parted, eyes locked on the screen like it had betrayed her. Nathan looked between us, something unspoken flickering across his face. And then someone clapped. Just once. Slow, deliberate. It was Vasilis, the limo driver. He stood near the back, still in uniform, his hat in one hand. The clapping echoed. Another joined. Then another. Until the room was filled with it. Alara turned toward me then. And for the first time, she looked small. Not because she wasn't beautiful or powerful or perfect, but because she realized the room wasn't just hers anymore. And I was only just getting started. The applause faded, but the tension didn't. It just shifted. It settled in the quiet spaces. The glances passed between guests, the rigid line of Alara's jaw, the way Nathan stood slightly apart now, as if suddenly unsure which direction the celebration was meant to face. I didn't move from where I stood. I didn't smile. I didn't bow or offer any expression at all. Because this wasn't a performance. It was a reclamation. Alara didn't say anything right away. She just blinked. Once, then twice, her face expressionless except for the subtle twitch in her right cheek. The same twitch she used to get when she lost a board game and tried to pretend she didn't care. Then she turned sharply on her heel and disappeared behind the draped curtains separating the ballroom from the hotel's inner hallway. The MC coughed awkwardly, then mumbled something about dinner being served. People resumed eating. Slowly. Like they weren't sure if they were allowed to enjoy it. Conversations hushed, picked up again, then fell into a rhythm of carefully chosen words and glances. I sat at a small table near the far edge, alone. The servers came and went, filling glasses, clearing plates, avoiding eye contact. 20 minutes later, Alara returned. But she didn't go to the head table. She walked straight toward me. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with that familiar frost. She sat across from me without invitation and folded her hands on the linen. I could smell the change in her perfume. Something sharper now. Less romantic. She didn't ask why I had come. She didn't comment on the video. She simply said, her voice a blade wrapped in silk, "You've made your point." I said nothing. The room moved around us, blurred and distant, like a scene in a snow globe shaken too hard. "You couldn't just let me have this," she said. "You had to insert yourself. You had to make it about you." Still, I said nothing. She leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "Do you think this changes anything? That people clapped? That you played a sad little home movie?" I met her gaze finally, and in the stillness between us I saw it, under the anger, under the pride, a crack. A small one, but it was there. I stood and walked away. The rest of the night passed in flashes. A few people stopped me, quietly, quickly, to say something kind. One aunt gripped my hand a little too tight and said, "I always knew there was more to you." A younger cousin whispered, "I'm glad you came." But most people just kept their distance, unsure of where I fit now. Unsure of what it meant that I had written myself back into a story they assumed had no room left. The next morning, I packed slowly. The suite felt smaller now. Not in a bad way. Just more real. I tucked the jumpsuit back into its garment bag, folded the green dress, zipped up my suitcase. As I was about to leave, there was a knock at the door. It was Nathan. He looked tired, rumpled, like he hadn't slept or had tried and failed. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood in the hallway, one hand against the frame, and said, "That video. It wasn't just about the piano, was it?" I waited. He sighed. "You know, I used to think Alara was just intense. Like, passionate. Focused. But now I'm starting to think maybe I mistook control for confidence." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He shifted awkwardly. "You're leaving?" "Yes," I said. "I figured." He paused, then added, "I don't think this is the life she wants. I think it's the image she wants people to think she's living." There was a long silence before I said, Maybe that's all she's ever wanted. Nathan ran a hand through his hair and nodded slowly. For what it's worth, you didn't ruin anything. You just reminded people there was more to see. I closed the door gently behind him. At the airport, I sat near the window watching the planes taxi across the sun-bleached tarmac. I felt strangely weightless. Not triumphant, not proud, just emptied of something heavy I'd been carrying for too long. My phone buzzed with a message. I hesitated before checking it. It was from a number I didn't recognize. The text read, "You were never basic. I just didn't know how to handle the parts of you I couldn't control."
I'm sorry.
No name, but I didn't need one. I turned the screen off and slipped the phone into my bag. Back home, the city felt both louder and smaller than I remembered. I returned to my apartment, watered the one plant that had managed not to die while I was gone, unpacked slowly, and went to the corkboard above my desk. I pinned something new. Not a photo, not a quote. Just the boarding pass from Santorini. Proof I had gone. That I had shown up when no one thought I would. 3 days later, I received a delivery. A thin black box tied with gold ribbon. No return address. Inside was a copy of the wedding program, glossy, overdesigned, and heavily edited. But tucked between the pages was something else. A photo.
Me.
Standing at the edge of the garden during the ceremony, half shadowed by light. Not staged. Not smiling. Just present. On the back, written in Alara's unmistakable hand, for words. You changed the ending. I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Closure? Vindication? Instead, I just sat on the floor holding the photo and breathing. The kind of breath that fills places long left empty. But the final twist hadn't arrived yet. 2 weeks after the wedding, I got an email from a production studio. They'd seen the clip. Apparently, it had gone viral after someone posted it with the caption, "She came, she saw, she redefined the story." They asked if I had more footage, if I was working on anything, if I would consider developing the story further. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a filmmaker. I wasn't an influencer. I was just someone who played piano and had learned how to carry silence like a second skin. But then I opened my old laptop. The one with the cracked hinge and the folder titled, "Maybe Someday." Inside were dozens of unfinished pieces. Short videos.
Notes. Songs.
All the things I had told myself weren't good enough, weren't ready, weren't worth sharing. I clicked one open, then another, and another. I spent the night piecing them together, stitching stories from scraps. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trying to catch up to my sister's light. I was building my own fire. And this time, it wasn't to be seen. It was to see how far it could go. The first thing I did after sending the email to the production studio was panic. Not the dramatic, movie-style kind where you pace around the room talking to yourself, but the quiet kind, where your stomach knots and your breath shortens and your brain starts listing every reason this was a terrible idea. Who did I think I was? What did I have to say that hadn't already been said by someone louder, prettier, more confident? I didn't tell anyone. Not even Cammie. She would have screamed and made me pancakes to celebrate. I needed to sit with it first. To know that I was doing it for me, not for the attention, not for revenge, and definitely not for some weird craving to outshine Alara. This wasn't about her anymore. A week passed with no reply. Then, too, I started to think maybe it was just a passing curiosity on their end. And in turn stumbling across a viral clip and reaching out before anyone higher up could shut it down. I started to forget the offer, let it slip into the background like all the other half-open doors in my life. Until the 3rd week, when a package arrived at the apartment.
It was simple.
A black envelope with my name hand-lettered in gold ink. Inside was a formal invite to speak on a panel. The theme was the power of the silent voice. Beneath that was a handwritten note. Not everyone is meant to take the stage, but some voices were only waiting for the right moment. Yours is one of them. They weren't asking me to audition. They weren't asking for a resume. They were asking me to show up. And this time I did. The panel was being held in New York. A small theater, midtown, nothing flashy. I arrived early, nerves tucked inside the sleeves of a black blouse I'd bought just for the occasion. The green dress stayed home. The jumpsuit stayed folded. This was something else now. Something new. When I stepped onto the stage, it wasn't like I imagined.
There were no spotlights.
No hush of awe. Just a scattering of people, some students, some industry people, a few creatives, maybe. I took my seat between two other speakers. One was a poet who had lost her hearing as a child. The other was a film editor who had lived in the shadow of her famous brother for most of her career. Their stories mirrored mine in ways that felt accidental but honest. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from the script I'd written.
I just talked.
About being labeled basic not because of who I was but because of who I wasn't. About how being left out had once felt like proof of failure, until I realized it was just someone else's fear disguised as power. I spoke about the wedding, the music, the silence that had once felt like safety but turned out to be a cage. I ended not with a flourish, but with a line I hadn't prepared. I was never too basic. I was just never interested in playing a part that didn't have my name on it. The applause was soft, then steady. It didn't roar, but it didn't need to. Afterward, a girl no older than 19 approached me. She had braces and chipped black nail polish and eyes that shimmered like she'd been holding something in for years. She said, "My sister told me I was boring, that no one would care what I had to say. But I heard your story, and I think maybe I've just been standing in the wrong room." I hugged her before I could stop myself. Later that evening, as I walked through the chilly streets of the city, my phone buzzed again. A new email. The subject line simply said, "Production draft, input request." I opened it slowly, heart racing. It was a script. My story, adapted, polished, but still holding the pulse of what I'd lived. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about the years before it. The moments I'd sat on the sidelines of someone else's spotlight and tried to clap loud enough to be seen. And they wanted to make it. As I scrolled, a name caught my eye. Executive consultant, Alara Brooks. I stopped walking. For a long moment, I stood in the middle of the sidewalk, the city moving around me like a stream I couldn't step into. I read it again, then a third time. Alara. Not just attached, but embedded. Which meant she knew. Which meant she'd reached out behind my back, and somehow, she was involved in the telling of a story she'd once tried to erase. I didn't call her. I didn't send an angry email. I just sat with it. A week passed before she reached out. Her voice on the phone was too casual.
Forced even.
She said she'd been approached by the studio, that they'd mentioned the script, that she thought maybe she could offer insight. I let her talk. I didn't stop her. Not because I agreed, but because I was watching her unravel her own version of justification. Then she said, "I thought maybe this could be something for both of us." And I replied, "It never was about both of us." There was a pause. A long one. Then she said, "So, what do you want?" And for the first time, I knew the answer. "Nothing from you." And I meant it. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished. Because 2 weeks later, the studio invited both of us to attend a table reading. Not together necessarily, but scheduled to be in the same room. A final draft read-through with potential cast and producers. I didn't want to go. Every instinct said I didn't need to be in that room with her again. But something quieter inside me disagreed. It whispered, "Finish the story." The studio space was tucked in a converted loft, high ceilings, rough brick, coffee in glass carafes. I arrived early. Sat in the far corner. Alara walked in 10 minutes late, sunglasses pushed into her hair, tailored coat flaring behind her like a cape. Some people greeted her. Some didn't. She scanned the room, then saw me. No wave. No smile. Just a blink. Then she took a seat across the circle. The reading began. Actors read our lines. Voices gave breath to words I'd typed in anger, in hope, in healing. There were moments I had forgotten. Moments that hit harder when spoken aloud. Alara flinched once when a line was read that mirrored her own wedding toast. "To my beautiful daughter, who was always meant to shine." And the follow-up line. even if someone had to be the shadow. When it ended, there was silence. Then polite applause. Then discussion. As people began to scatter, Alara stood and crossed the room. I stood too, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to face her. She said, "They want to call it the one they almost forgot." I nodded. "That's accurate." She looked down, then said, "I didn't ask to be part of it because I wanted to steal it. I think, maybe I just wanted to understand it. Understand you." I waited. Then she added, softer, "You never tried to take anything from me. You just wanted to be seen. And I made that feel like a crime." There it was. Not an apology. Not fully, but the outline of one. "I was afraid of sharing the space," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Because I didn't think I'd be enough if I did." I didn't hug her, but I said, "You were enough."
So was I.
We just didn't know how to believe it at the same time. She looked like she might cry but didn't. Then she asked, "Can I walk you out?" And I said, "You can walk beside me."
So we did.
And the story wasn't over. Not yet. The premiere was scheduled for late spring, timed to coincide with a small but respected film festival in Toronto. It wasn't Sundance and it wasn't glitzy, but it was enough to draw critics, press, and the kind of audiences that actually listened. The kind that looked between the lines. The film had taken shape quietly, without the buzz of scandal or the noise of Alara's social circle. It wasn't promoted as based on a true story, or labeled with anyone's name. Just a title. The one they almost forgot.
Clean.
Sharp. Heavy with suggestion. I flew in alone. Not in a limo this time. Just a rideshare with a driver named Marcy, who talked about her daughter's violin recitals the whole ride to the hotel. I let her. I smiled at the parts where she beamed with pride. I nodded at the parts about stage fright. And I remembered what it used to feel like to be that kid, unsure if the applause was for you or for the idea of you. The night of the screening, I wore black again. Not the velvet jumpsuit. Something simpler. A tailored dress with sleeves and a neckline that didn't try too hard. My hair was down. My lipstick was red. But not to match Alara. Not to be anything except mine. I saw her before I saw the theater. She was already on the carpet, posing beside the cast, all satin and smile. She hadn't texted. We hadn't spoken since the reading. That space between us hadn't closed, but it hadn't widened either. We'd both decided it was better to leave it open like a window, one we could come back to, or just keep open to let air through. I didn't interrupt her moment. I entered through the side door with a guest badge and a quiet wave at the usher. My seat was 3 rows back, aisle side, exactly where I liked to sit in concerts growing up, close enough to feel, far enough to think. The lights dimmed. The screen lit. And the story began. It started with the envelope. The one with no return address. The one that didn't say her name. It moved through the scenes I remembered, and some I didn't, exaggerated for drama, trimmed for pacing, but all holding the same pulse. A girl who was told she didn't belong. Who was pushed into the shadows because someone else was more practiced at stealing the light. A girl who stopped asking for space and learned to take it instead. Not loudly. Not violently. But with the calm certainty of someone who finally understood what she was made of. The wedding scene had been altered, fictionalized, but not softened. There was a speech. There was a solo. There was a video that played in place of a slideshow, and a quiet tension that rose like a tide until the silence that followed was deafening. And then, just like that, the music. A simple piece. One melody. One truth. When the credits rolled, I didn't clap right away. I just breathed. Slowly.
Deeply.
Like something long coiled had finally unknotted in my chest. Then the applause came. And it stayed. Not polite. Not performative. Just real. After the screening, people began to filter into the reception room. It was understated. White lights. Small tables. A few camera crews.
No fanfare.
Just chatter. Questions. Energy that buzzed without screaming. I stood near the back again. It felt fitting. A producer approached and asked if I'd consider a Q&A panel later that month in LA. I said yes before I thought too hard about it. Another person asked if I had more work. I said maybe. A third just smiled and said, that last scene, where the character doesn't smile but still wins. That broke me. In the best way. I was turning to leave when I felt her behind me. Alara. She wore gold this time. Hair swept into something elegant. Her expression was unreadable, but her hands were empty.
No champagne. No klucz.
Just her. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by people, and still completely alone. Then she said, I didn't expect it to feel like this. Like what? I asked. Like I was watching your story. Not mine. Not ours. Yours. I tilted my head slightly. It always was. I know, she said. I just didn't know how to be in it without making it about me. She looked away then. And for the first time I saw it, her fear. Not the flashy, dramatic kind. The quiet kind. The kind you hide behind highlighter and angles and control. I didn't come here to fix anything, I told her. I didn't even come here for you. I know, she said again. There was a beat. Then she added, but I came for you. And I didn't know what to say to that. So I nodded. She stepped back, gave me a small smile, and faded into the crowd like a leaf on water, still beautiful, still moving, but no longer trying to lead the current. I left soon after. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was full. Full in the kind of way that doesn't crave more, just peace. I walked out into the cold, the street slick with a soft sheen of leftover rain. My shoes clicked against the sidewalk, and I thought about the girl who once sat at a piano in a beige dress and told herself to stay quiet. I thought about how far she'd come. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop. I had a folder now, not called Maybe Someday. It was called Now. Inside were outlines, ideas, half-written pieces, and clips from old recordings. And something new. A message from the studio, already asking if I'd consider writing a full-length script. I stared at the blinking cursor. Then I started typing. The story wasn't over. Not because I had more to prove, but because I had more to say. Because somewhere out there, someone still felt like a shadow. Still wore their silence like armor. And maybe, just maybe, they needed someone to say it was okay to want more. So I wrote. And I didn't write for Alara. I didn't write for the people who once called me basic. I didn't even write for the producers or the critics or the clapping audience in Toronto. I wrote for the girl in the jumpsuit. The one who showed up in a limo not to be seen. But because she finally remembered she had always belonged there. And no one was going to forget her again.